Welcome to Everything Icelandic, an online program of the Icelandic National League of North America. I'm your host, Stefan Jonasson, past president of the Icelandic National League and editor of Lögberg Heimskringla. Christmas in Iceland is special, according to Alda Sigmundsdóttir. Everything pulsates with a vibrant energy as the Icelanders embrace those festive traditions that make them a tribe. In her slim volume, The Little Book of the Icelanders at Christmas, Alda takes readers on a journey through the Yuletide in Iceland, its bright lights, its foodstuffs, folklore, and conventions. Alda Sigmundsdóttir caught the world's attention with her former blog, The Iceland Weather Report, from 2005 to 2010, and she has maintained a loyal audience of those who devour her books, social media posts, and appearances on the airwaves, including BBC and CBC. Born in Reykjavik, Iceland, she has also lived in Canada, Cyprus, Germany, and the United Kingdom, before returning to Iceland, where her little books are a popular souvenir for tourists, explaining Icelanders and their quirks in short, pithy vignettes that are both informative and entertaining. Since The Little Book of the Icelanders, which came out 10 years ago, she has followed up with The Little Book of the Icelanders in the Old Days, The Little Book of the Hidden People, The Little Book of Tourists in Iceland, The Little Book of Days in Iceland, The Little Book of Icelandic, which contains as much about the language as most people are ever likely to learn, and The Little Book of the Icelanders at Christmas, which sets the stage for today's conversation. She also wrote Living Inside the Meltdown, an account of the financial crisis in Iceland 14 years ago, Unraveled, a novel set in the same period, and Daughter, a poignant memoir of a childhood marred by trauma, the denial she employed to survive, and the struggle to regain her authentic self. Beyond being entertaining, informative, and thought-provoking, this remarkable body of work is characterized by the unvarnished truth, which is what makes Alda's writing and commentaries so refreshing in an age of caricatures, memes, and outright propaganda. Welcome, Alda, to Everything Icelandic. Grateful that you're able to join us today.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's amazing. It's amazing to hear someone talk about everything I've done.
Well, it's a huge body of work, and I really have. What I've loved about it is that people love to make stuff up about national groups and cultures and language, and you just kind of cut to the chase and really tell it very precisely and yet entertainingly. I mean, there's always good humor in your writing too.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always been partial to the truth.
It's a good ground to stand on.
Yes.
Anyway,
absolutely.
I've got a few questions for you, and maybe towards the end, our audience will have some questions as well. And so let's just launch in. We're talking about Christmas, the Yuletide, Yule.
Yeah.
In the English-speaking world, if there's one thing about Christmas in Iceland that people are familiar with, it's the Jólabókaflóð, the Yule Book Flood, which seems embellished a bit in the retelling. While I might have expected them to have a blizzard instead of a flood, I'm intrigued by the idea. And what can you tell us about this interesting custom?
Yes, so the Jólabókaflóð, which is, the literal translation is the Christmas book flood, is the name we give to this sort of deluge of books that hits the market in the 2 or so months before Christmas. And there's been a tradition for probably about 60 years or so or maybe a little bit more, of giving everyone a book for Christmas. So everyone gets a book under the tree. And so this is the reason why Icelandic publishers tend to publish before Christmas. And it's just this flurry of literary activity that happens. So new books come out. Everyone is really interested in the books that are coming out. There are lots of interviews with the authors, lots of readings. And yeah, so, oh, someone is...
Someone's joining us.
Someone's not muted. And yeah, so that's it in a nutshell, I would say.
Does everybody like getting a book, or are there some who view it as being more like getting socks and underwear?
A lot. I actually did a little sort of survey on Facebook recently, because I was writing a little piece or something, or doing an interview about the Jólabókaflóð. And because my personal feeling was that it was not as big a thing as before, because of course we live in the age of, you know, the audio book and the ebook and so on, not to mention the internet and all that. So
right.
But the general consensus was that, you know, that people just don't experience Christmas without a book, without getting a book on Christmas Eve, and then, you know, going to bed and reading in the latter part of the evening or the day after. So yeah, I think it is still a strong tradition, although I think it is a little bit generational. So the newer generation is not as keen or excited about getting a book for Christmas.
Maybe they'll come around to it eventually.
Maybe they will.
Yeah. So we can because the world needs more books. They're good for us. They're entertainment that we can devour at our own pace. And
yeah, and it's a delightful tradition. It really is.
Yes, yes. So what's it like in the weeks leading up to Christmas in Iceland? Is Advent important to the season, and what can you tell us about Litla Jól?
Advent is very important, and we are right now in the middle of Advent. The Advent to Christmas begins on the fourth Sunday prior to Christmas Eve. And many people just wait for that Sunday because, of course, we're also in the darkest time of the year. So people love decorating. They love putting up their colored lights, you know, their little stars and things. And people really, you know, go all out up here. And there's an Advent wreath that many people have, which has 4 candles, and I'm sure being a pastor or a clergyman, you know much better than I do what they represent. These 4 candles is something to do with scripture and what have you. But so you light 1 candle on each Sunday leading up to Christmas. And this is also when Icelanders get really sort of into their Christmas or Yule traditions. And every family has their own sort of set of traditions that they usually, that they observe every Advent or every Christmas. So some families get together to make laufabrauð, which is the leaf bread, this paper thin, wafer thin bread that people make, very similar to poppadoms, if people are familiar with those, but without the spices. And people bake cookies a lot during the Advent. There are also lots of Christmas concerts. People go out to Christmas buffets a lot. So there are these very sort of set traditions in Iceland for the Advent, and people get really into it. You know, I mean, this is the time that everyone waits for, and it probably also because it is the darkest time of the year, people really need something sort of to cheer them up and get festive.
So I mean that as kind of a natural seasonal response that works whether you attach faith to it or not.
Of course.
I'm thinking of some of my Icelandic family and friends who are atheists, who nevertheless break out the Advent wreath
Yep.
at the beginning of the season. So, is it? Is there a time where it's too soon to start celebrating Christmas? I mean, we do a lot of shaming here. You know, if people, you know, get festive, say before Remembrance Day or before Thanksgiving in the U.S. So, is it ever too soon, or?
Well, I mean, most Icelanders do stick to the Advent. You know, that's the tradition here. But I noticed that lights start going up earlier and earlier, and I think that actually started during the kreppa, the crisis, when we had the financial meltdown, and also in COVID, because people just feel that they need some sort of cheering up and a little bit of light in all the gloom. So I noticed now that lights tend to start going up maybe in the middle of November, when it starts to get really dark, then the days are very short. But generally, yes, I mean, IKEA, right? I mean, IKEA starts Christmas in October. But generally, no, people tend to just reserve it for this time, these 4 weeks before Christmas.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us about Little Yule.
Little Yule is literally translated means little Christmas. And Little Yule is something that they will have in sort of schools or workplaces, play schools. And it's sort of like a miniature version of Christmas before the main event. So in schools, for example, when maybe school lets out, they'll have like a day later, the Little Yule, and the kids get all dressed up in their best clothes, and they come to the school and they get maybe hot chocolate, and they'll sort of dance around the Christmas tree, which is also kind of an Icelandic tradition, where they sing Christmas songs and sort of walk around the tree, and maybe a jólasveinn, a Santa Claus or two, will arrive and sort of entertain them. So it's just like a little start to the festivities for schools.
So it sounds like I should probably move my Christmas tree away from the wall. You know,
if you're gonna have Leo
dance around it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. For first change inspired for this year's Christmas season.
Okay.
So let's move on. Growing up, I never heard about the jólasveinn. Or the Yule Lads. I don't recall my father mentioning them, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, not even once. Although I know people here who claim that it was a part of their childhood. Mm-hmm. In your book, you write, some folks would have you believe that the Yule Lads are the Icelandic version of Santa Claus, but that's hogwash. Good example of your candor. So what can you tell us about the origin of the Yule Lads?
Yeah, so the Yule Lads are this set of very impish little trolls that look like men, that have sort of morphed into men over the centuries.
Sure.
And they were first mentioned actually in, I think, the 17th century in a folk tale. They are the children of Grýla, and Grýla is actually a much older construction. And Grýla is an ogre who eats children if they've been naughty. So she lives up in the mountain with her hideous husband Leppalúði, and their awful cat, which is called the Yule cat. And they have these children, these sons that are the jólasveinar, or the Yule Lads, we call them. And the jólasveinar initially were mischievous and sort of they were a nuisance. They caused havoc in the old days, in the old farmhouses, the turf houses. So Each one has his own definitive sort of characteristic or character defect. One of them, the first one that comes down is called Giljakur, and he suckles the ewes, right? So he would like steal the milk from the population. And nota bene, you know, a lot of them have these defects that have to do with stealing people's food, which makes perfect sense because food was so incredibly scarce back then. So the worst thing that could happen if someone came and stole your food. So these Yule lads came and they, you know, one of them stole sausages, the other one the smoked lamb, the one suckled the ewes, one of them slammed doors for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, so they became fairly popular in, I think, the 1930s, when there was like a song made about them, or a poem, and it was sort of decorated with pictures. And before that, there actually exist, I think, around 80 names of different Yule lad apparitions, but sort of these 13 became popular with this this poem that was created. And so today, the tradition is that there are 13 of them, so they come down to the inhabited areas, one per day, for the 13 days leading up to Christmas. And children, they leave their shoe out on the windowsill, so near a window. And if they've been good that day, they get a little present from the Yule lad of the day in the shoe. If they've been naughty, however, they get a potato, which I must say is a marked improvement to Lila coming down and eating them, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'd rather have the potato.
It's also better than coal.
Than coal, yes, yeah. Exactly. At one point there was coal. They get a piece of coal, but nobody uses coal anymore.
Okay.
So yeah, did that answer the question? So that's sort of in a nutshell.
Okay.
The Yule lads are about today.
Okay, so and then they return after Christmas?
They return back to the mountain, one per day.
Okay.
That occasion is not commemorated in any way like their arrival is.
Okay, so they don't pilfer kids
presents on the way back. They just go very quietly back to the mountains.
Okay. They seem quite popular, though. You know,
they're popular.
Yeah. So charming. I you know, if I'd have known that gifts were associated, and if I'd have known about it when I was young enough.
I'm not sure. It probably wasn't when you were. When I was young, when I was growing up, it was only the last Yule lad that left a present in the shoe.
Okay.
As I remember. But now, materialistic, I don't know, whatever.
So the tradition has grown with prosperity.
I think probably, yes.
Hey.
And cheap trinkets from China.
Right. Well, of course. You know, I suppose if one is a billionaire, you know, you can expect watches and jewelry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so those are going to get more common and but worthwhile things. Yeah. That's actually quite delightful. I've always been, you know, I'm a skeptic about some of these things, and so it's always nice to get the story firsthand. So there's a state church in Iceland, the Church of Iceland, which most people are still members of. But it's arguably one of the most secular societies in the world. And so beyond the Church of Iceland and other Christian churches, there's a growing number of non-Christian groups like, you know, Sivment, the Humanist Society, and the Pagan Society. Is religion still a significant part of Icelanders' Yuletide celebrations? And have these alternative communities, you know, affected how Icelanders celebrate the season?
Mm. I would say, I think Icelanders are more religious deep down than they maybe appear on the surface, but church going is not a big thing here. But you know, most people are quite spiritual.
Okay.
But as you mentioned with the Advent wreaths, you know, I mean, people will put those up without knowing what they mean or caring, and even if they're atheists, they'll observe many of these traditions. But having said that, one very important element of Christmas Eve, for example, for a lot of families, not everyone, a lot of families, is the Mass on Christmas Eve. So there is one at 6 p.m., which is the official start to Christmas. It starts officially at 6 p.m. on the 24th of December. And there's actually another one at 11:30 that evening. Not in every church, but in the main Domkirkjan Cathedral in Reykjavik, for example. And many people will listen to it on the radio if they're not actually there. So that, I think that is still a very sort of treasured tradition to have that Mass, yeah.
Okay, and today those of us outside of Iceland can actually listen to it on the web.
Absolutely.
I've now attended the service by the internet for several years.
Oh, wow.
And it occurred to me how wonderful it would have been for my langama after she came here and could no longer attend service. How wonderful it would have been to sit by the computer and still be a part of it.
Is it recorded then, or do you just listen to it?
They do it live.
They do it live.
Roos does it live online. And so anyone in the audience today, if you want, you just have to remember there's a time difference between here and Iceland. So 6 o'clock in Iceland falls differently than it does where you are. But it's a wonderful service. Of course, I hardly understand a word, except for the readings are familiar even in another language, and the hymns are beautiful. It is a nice way to spend the first part of Christmas Eve. Here in North America, the Yuletide is associated with traditional foods that have become staples of the Icelandic communities here, such as rúllupylsa and vínarteta, and of course they're time locked. These are popular foods from the time of the immigration that have now become necessary. But I have a sense that because these choices are locked in time, that the must-have foods today are a little different. So what would we need on the table to have a modern Icelandic Christmas?
It's been so cold here. I have to put on my Icelandic sweater. You're absolutely right. The vínarterta and rúllupylsa are not a thing here. Rúllupylsa a little bit in February during the Þorrablót celebrations. And vínarterta is something we very often call it randalín. I think most people know it by the name randalín. And it's really quite rare, I find, here that people actually eat vínarterta. I know how important it is to the Western Icelandic community. In terms of food, I think every family has their own traditional food. So most families eat the same thing every Christmas Eve for Christmas Eve dinner. And it's usually something that is not eaten at any other time of the year. So that will vary. In most people, if they eat meat, of course, now a lot of people are going vegan. And so vegan sort of baked Wellingtons are very popular. But in terms of meat eaters, it's usually either rjupa, which is the ptarmigan, which is a game bird, but it was overhunted. It was a traditional Christmas food. So in the early 2000s, there was a hunting ban put on. So now you can't buy them in the shops. You have to actually hunt them yourself. So most people have sort of migrated away from that. And so another popular thing is hamburgerhryggur, which is smoked ham. And that's like a Danish tradition that comes from Denmark. So as I say, depending on which family you're from, but I think if I was, to say 3 foods that are around Christmas that almost everyone has, is the hankekjöt, which is the traditional smoked lamb. That goes way, way back in our history. That was a very traditional food, even back in the day when people lived in the turf houses. The laufabrauð, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is what we call leaf bread because it's so thin. And that goes back to the days when Iceland was so poor that people couldn't really afford flour. So they made whatever they could with the least amount of flour possible. And that is still eaten today. And of course, we buy it in the shops, or some people make their own. And that's usually like a family gathering. And the third thing is what we call jólaöl, which is a drink. And it's a concoction that you get by mixing together orange pop and malt, like a malt extract kind of drink. And we call it sometimes malt og appelsín, which is, malt and orangeade, basically. Right. And so these 3 things are something that most people will have at some point over Christmas.
Okay, so and there's still time for people here to shop to find the appropriate Christmas dish to their circumstance. When I was growing up, I was one of probably half a dozen kids in my whole school who had the delight of celebrating Christmas beginning on Christmas Eve. Everybody else had to wait till Sunday morning, and I remember my dad saying to one of my friends who was annoyed about this tradition that it was that Santa visited Icelanders first, which was a little outrageous, but of course I believed it for several years until I realized that wasn't the case. But my friends really envied me. Christmas Eve. What's Christmas Eve like in Iceland? I take it it's more of a family day once that church service is done.
Yes, and it tends to be very set. They're very set traditions on Christmas Eve that people observe year after year and that do not change very much. And sort of the whole society begins at 6 p.m. So that is when the official Christmas celebrations begin. And it's actually a really nice tradition, I find. And I mean, I can't imagine celebrating Christmas on any other way than on Christmas Eve. I absolutely love it. And so what tends to happen is that the immediate family spends Christmas Eve together. So it's a very intimate kind of evening and celebration. And people do not tend to sort of incorporate outsiders, like they don't invite people over for dinner on Christmas Eve, or not even, members of the extended family. So it's normally be the parents and the children, possibly the grandparents, and everyone tends to be gathered by 6 p.m. So people are not usually, or they try not to be coming later than that together. And the radio will normally be on while people are preparing, so, you know, from 4, whatever, people are preparing this big Christmas dinner. And there'll be some kind of radio Christmas themed show on. And then at about 5:45, 15 minutes before, the radio goes silent. And this radio silence, of course, is, you know, would be considered pretty serious in most places, like the radio went dead, you know. But here, these 15 minutes before Christmas, it's like a very solemn time. And so 15 minutes before, there's nothing on the radio. And then at 6 p.m. sharp, all the churches around the country begin ringing their bells. And that comes through the radio as well, from the Domkirkjan, the cathedral in Reykjavik. And that is a really kind of a festive moment, you know, when the churches ring in. It's called ringing in the Yule, or hringja inn jólin. And funny thing is, a little tidbit of information is that the silence before Christmas is actually the most listened to program or piece of programming on the national broadcasting service in Iceland. So it gets more listens than any other during the year. So then there'll be a big Christmas dinner. After that, normally the children get to open one gift under the tree. I think that's the norm in most families, while the adults sort of put everything away, and, you know, you load the dishwasher and whatever you do to take the meal off the table. And then everyone sits around the tree and opens presents. And and that normally takes up most of the evening. And after that, people tend to crawl into bed with their book, whatever book they got for Christmas. And and that will be sort of the end of Christmas Eve. It's a very low-key, almost like a sacred evening, and really a lovely time, I find.
It sounds peaceful.
Very, very
peaceful gathering. That's wonderful. Being a minister, I sometimes have to work Christmas Eve, but it is a wonderful, family focused tradition, and it even makes me think that maybe the apparent secularity of Icelanders combined with deep spirituality is related to the fact that years ago, priests only visited the local church, occasionally. They weren't necessarily there every Sunday. And so worship was focused around the hearth. And the evening kvöldvaka, the evening wake, was focused around the hearth. And so that Christmas Eve is almost in keeping with that kind of way of being in the world and making time sacred.
Yeah. Interesting perspective. Yeah.
So, well, someone actually posted a question in the chat that aligns with the next question I had up for you. Edward said he was curious about whether Thorlaksmessa is much observed, and I had the same question, partly because it's a unique day in the Icelandic church calendar. So, and as it happens this year, my family is celebrating Christmas on Thorlaksmessa because I'm working Christmas Eve. Okay. So tell us about this unique Icelandic holiday.
Yes, well, Thorlaksmessa happens to be my birthday, so it's like a doubly significant day for me. It's the best/worst day to have a birthday, but that's just a little aside. But Thorlaksmessa, I would say, is heralds in the celebrations, and it's a really fun day, and it's also sort of known as the day when Icelanders eat rancid skate. And so this tradition of eating skata, which is skate as in fish, right? Has become very popular in the last few years. And when I say eat rancid skate, I actually mean that. So this is skate that has been left to decompose for at least 4 weeks prior to the day. And so it smells very, very bad, and it tastes even worse. Why people eat it, I don't know. I think there's been some kind of, I don't think anyone knows where it actually originated, but there's been some speculation. It comes from the West Fjords. So there's been some speculation that farmers fed their workers this awful dish the day before Christmas to make the Christmas meal taste better, like more special, whatever. I don't know if that is true.
It sounds like it would work.
It might work, maybe. I guess the Christmas meal probably wasn't that great, so they had to, somehow make it taste a little better. But Icelanders nowadays, this has become like a big party thing to eat this skate. So people get together at lunchtime, and this is something that you would never eat by yourself. You have to eat it in with a group of people. And most people chase it down with copious amounts of brennivin, which is the Icelandic schnapps, right? The Black Death called also. And so it becomes like a party thing. And so people tend to do that at lunchtime, get together. Some people don't eat the skate, they'll eat something else, but it's a gathering of friends. Then this is also the day that many people put up their Christmas tree. There's not a tradition in Iceland of putting up the tree way before the event, like in some places in the world. Like I know in North America, and especially in the States, I think people put up their trees quite early. That tends not to happen here, although it is starting because more people are using fake trees. So they'll put them up a little bit earlier. But the tradition is that the tree goes up on Þorláksmessa or even Christmas Eve and comes down on the 6th of January. So just over the holidays. And for live trees, I think that is actually optimal. After that, they start to lose their needles and what have you. So that tends to happen on Þorláksmessa. And then in the evening, the downtown area just fills up with people. So it's just it's almost like a festival atmosphere in the downtown Reykjavik. So people go there and they're picking up last minute gifts, or the shops will have something to drink or to eat, and there'll be vendors on the street, and it's just a really kind of big party fun atmosphere where people get together with friends, neighbors, whatever, just walk around and say hello to everyone before Christmas. So that is also a really, really festive day and a lot of fun usually.
It sounds like it, although I'm not sure St. Thorlakr would have approved of the festive part of it.
Probably not.
It is interesting, though, because my father always put up the Christmas tree on Þorláksmessa and took it down on 12th night. So that was a tradition that carried over. And if I asked about it, he would just say, that's how it's always been done. So,
wow.
So it's sometimes interesting to see where behaviors that we may not connect with our ancestry may well be related to who we come from.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So as I said in the introduction to you've had an opportunity to live in several in several different countries over the course of your lifetime. Is there anything that you found appealing about Christmas in those places that might be different than Christmas at home in Iceland?
I mean, quite frankly, I have to say that no place comes close to the magical experience of Christmas in Iceland. I have to I just have to be honest with that I always really missed Iceland at Christmas because it's so festive and all these traditions and everything. I just, no, I didn't find that anywhere else. I'm sorry.
That's wonderful. That confirms we won't call it the natural superiority of Yuletide in Iceland, but I suspect there's a lot of us who feel that way, that and certainly in my family, which was a mixed family, it was the Icelandic traditions that prevailed in the family over German and French traditions, although there were traces of those elements, but overwhelmingly it was an Icelandic Christmas in our household. Here we have movies and songs that we associate with the season. I think of It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol or Miracle on 34th Street. Are there particular movies or songs that are part of the Icelandic season that Icelanders associate with the Christmas season?
Yeah, there aren't the ones that you mentioned, like It's a Wonderful Life. They haven't really made inroads here, and I actually, because you wrote to me before this and mentioned, if the same question, so I had to think about it, and I had to actually think about it, but I think there's the one song that is sort of a staple here is Jólakötturinn, which is the Yule Cat song that has been immortalized by Björk, I think, more than anybody else. It's a wonderful, quirky little song about the Yule Cat. So I think that one is, if there was one traditional Icelandic Christmas song, it would be that one. But of course, we have lots of Christmas songs like, Silent Night and all of these hymn type songs with Icelandic lyrics that have been the music is probably from somewhere abroad, but the lyrics have been made Icelandic. And the only film that I could think of that is shown, I think it's shown on the National Broadcasting Service every Christmas, is Fanny and Alexander by Ingmar Bergman, which happens to be my favorite film of all time. It's the one film that they show here regularly, and I think a lot of people watch.
Okay. Well, yeah. I'm gonna have to grab a disc of Fanny and Alexander and
it's wonderful.
And watch it this season. Here in Canada and in Britain, we have Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. So it's the day when people head out to find bargains or to redeem the Christmas gifts they were disappointed with. I try to hide at home myself. So what happens after Christmas is over? The days that follow.
Yeah, we don't do Boxing Day here. Actually, the 26th is a holiday also in Iceland. Some of the bars open in the evening, so like younger people tend to go out in the evening. But we call it second in Christmas, annari jólum. So it feels like very much a part of the tradition, the Christmas holiday. And so the sort of slam of materialistic shopping and things, that doesn't really happen here until after New Year's Eve, so in January. And the days between Christmas and New Year's are usually reserved for relaxing or meeting the extended family. So the immediate family will be together on Christmas Eve, but normally the extended family will get together in the days either on Christmas Day or on the 26th, second in Christmas.
Okay.
And yeah, so sometime during that period, and people tend to just try to relax in these in-between days. If they go to work, it's normally, there's not much happening, but basically, Icelandic society shuts down except for the absolute bare necessities of that need to get done.
Which shows that you can do that without industry collapsing and society crumbling, that it's actually possible to shut down and be together with your loved ones for an extended period.
Mm-hmm.
I only have a couple of questions left, so I would tell our viewers that if they have any questions that they'd like asked, to pop them into the chat. But one thing I wanted to ask you about is a custom I find deeply moving, and that is the placement of lights on the graves of departed loved ones. I mean, Icelandic cemeteries are beautiful. They light up. And can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that is a lovely custom. It's common most people do it, not everyone, to go on Christmas Eve and also on New Year's Eve day, and place candles or some sort of lights on the graves of, your family members who have passed. And it's just a very lovely thing. Normally it's done in the late afternoons after it gets dark. Of course, it gets dark quite early on that day. So the cemeteries are absolutely lit up. I mean, they're twinkling with candles and colored lights and are just absolutely beautiful. So yeah, that is a very integral part of Christmas here.
So the entirety of one's ancestors join one in the celebration, in a sense.
Yes, I think most people will go to maybe their parents' grave, or
sure,
maybe not far beyond that, but yes, it's a time of remembering those you love that have passed. Yeah,
I know. Here many churches do what they call Blue Christmas celebrations or celebration services in the days leading up to Christmas, and there's a sense in which this is almost organically grows out of the Icelandic way of being in the world, that addresses that the grief that comes with the season as well as the joy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a magnificent custom. There is a question in the chat here I have for you. What tips should visitors to Iceland know about coming for Christmas in Reykjavik, especially if they don't have family to visit? She says, I'm thinking regarding expectations. What days shops and restaurants are closed?
Well, I know, with the advent of tourism, of course, we have a lot of tourists that come over for Christmas and New Year's Eve. So we have a lot more open now than previously. I mean, 2 decades ago, people would come to Iceland during this time and everything would be closed. It was just like it was a disaster. There might be one hotel that had dinner on Christmas Eve. That was it. So there are a lot more, but just be prepared for the fact that most places will be closed on Christmas Eve. There may be a few. Of course, the hotel restaurants tend to be open, but just be aware and do some research before you come.
So prepare basically for Sunday in a rural community in the 1970s here in North America, and you should be well prepared to be a Christmas guest in Iceland. We're coming into the close here. How do Icelanders celebrate the turning of the year, the arrival of the next year?
Well, New Year's Eve is a chapter unto itself, I would say. So New Year's Eve is also very, very sort of steeped in tradition. Not as relaxed, of course, as Christmas Eve. People tend to get their party on New Year's Eve. But similar to Christmas Eve is that families will come together. There will be a big dinner. And then after dinner, people tend to head out to what they call brennur, which are these huge bonfires that are held all over the country. And they're usually lit at around 8 p.m. In the Reykjavik area, they'll be in several locations, maybe 7 or 10 locations. And people tend to head out there. And this is just a fun place to meet your neighbors and people and people have sparklers, and some may set off some light fireworks, and then people, after coming home, there's one very, very entrenched tradition that the whole society observes, and that is, or everyone who's Icelandic, let's say, and that is the annual áramótaskaup. And this is like an hour-long comedy program on the National Broadcasting Service that lampoons the main sort of news events of the year. And everyone watches this. I mean, the streets are absolutely bare for this hour. And it's usually great fun, and people sort of gather around the TV and laugh. And this is a topic of conversation long into the next month, in January. What did you think of the áramótaskaup? Was it better than last year or whatever? When that finishes at 11:30 p.m., everyone heads out and lights off the fireworks, sets off the fireworks. In Iceland, fireworks are sold unrestricted to the general public in the days between Christmas and New Year's. Still, I think this may change eventually. There's been a lot of talk about restricting this, but this is actually the main source of funding for the Icelandic Search and Rescue Associations. So they take in almost all of their funding on New Year's Eve through the sale of fireworks. And it's absolute mayhem. I mean, everyone setting off fireworks, and the sky just lights up, and it's just an extravaganza. And that happens at midnight, of course. And then when that dies down, maybe 15, 20 minutes later, everyone heads home to party or whatever they want to do. So yes, that's it in a very abbreviated nutshell of the New Year's Eve traditions.
It sounds like a good time of year to hold your dog close. It must be terrifying.
We send ours out to the countryside.
Okay. I have a question from Patrice. What happens with people living in Iceland who don't have families with whom to celebrate the holidays?
Well, of course, there are places where they have like open houses, like the Salvation Army or charities. They will open for Christmas dinner for homeless people or just people who don't have anyone to celebrate with. But I mean, I say that it is mostly reserved for the immediate family, but of course, if there are people who are alone or, and someone knows that they'll be alone, then they will often get invited to celebrate with an Icelandic family. And I mean, I think the main sentiment among the Icelanders on Christmas Eve is that no one should be alone unless they want to be.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's actually a sense of the season that I think is carried over to the Icelandic communities here. And so, that sense of Icelandic hospitality. And of course, sometimes our immediate families include that special friend or neighbor who's lives and might naturally be there.
Yeah.
This is all wonderful. Overall, what would if you had to boil it all down, what would you say is essential to celebrating the Yuletide in Iceland?
I would say being with loved ones, being with family and loved ones, and eating good food.
Okay.
That sort of encapsulates it.
Sure. That but that sounds like a wonderful focus. I'd like to thank you for being with us today, Alda. It has been wonderful. You're full of information and presented in a lively way. This is the book, the little book of the Icelanders at Christmas, one of the little book series. I would encourage you. I have bought multiple copies of many of these books to give away to people who ask me about Iceland. Because if you want to understand Iceland, the little book series are just remarkable. So thank you, Alda, for the books. I know they're a very popular item with tourists in Iceland, and they're very popular as gifts. So if you are looking for a gift to give this Christmas to join the Jólabókaflóð, you could opt to go purely Icelandic and order a little book. We will post links in at our social media accounts and on the INL webpage to tell you how you can purchase Alda's books. And as I say, I would encourage you to do so. I have every one except one I didn't know existed, but it's on order. And I would encourage you all to do the same. So thank you, Alda, for this little but very comprehensive look at Christmas in Iceland. We've enjoyed having you with us, and I'd like to thank those who joined us for today's webinar as well. May you all have a joyous and blessed Christmas and a peaceful New Year.
Thank you so much for having me, and gleðileg jól to everyone. Thank you so much, and yes, it's been a pleasure.